Google, as we know, is being sued and all this information is kind of getting out there. What does that mean for SEO, for Google, for search, and as a whole, as kind of more and more of Google's recipes or ranking algorithms get kind of out there? We all thought that clicks from the search results were a ranking factor, even though Google denied it. And now all of a sudden, here's this document saying, oh, yeah, we use clicks as a ranking factor. And so it's how much more of that starts to come out. How do SEOs leverage that information as more and more that comes out? Like, oh, okay, how do I get more clicks now that I know it's a ranking factor? Does Google start to dampen that more now because it's out? Like that kind of cat and mouse game that SEOs and Googles have been playing for, ever since Google launched in the early 2000s, right? Or late 90s, whatever it was. We're now kind of getting that recipe. So what does that look like in the future?
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the eMarketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm super excited to be chatting with Shawn Huber, who both he and I will be at the Brighton SEO Conference in San Diego shortly. So we'll start with what your session topic is, Shawn. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for having me. Excited to be part of the session today. And so Brighton, I'm going to be talking about helping Google efficiently and effectively crawl your website and figure out what pages are indexed or not indexed or why. It's something that I think a lot of us SEOs struggle with sometimes. And so I actually found some really good tactics that have helped me, especially with really large websites, like hundreds of millions of URLs, of finding out where Google's going, where they're getting stuck, and then making sure as many pages as possible get indexed.
Sure. One thing that, never really did a study against, but I sort of found that the level of linking to a website tended to correlate pretty highly with how aggressively Google was willing to crawl. Have you found that to be the case as well, that like extremely well linked websites, which, if you want to use the term domain authority, you can use that. But, generally there would seem to be a correlation that there was a willingness to crawl more, as well as obviously rank better, that related to the inbound link structures.
Absolutely. Obviously, Google has to find sites, right? So links, it's like the backbone of, Google when they first came out. Like, hey, I think there's something there with the number of links to a site that we should pay attention to. So 100%. Some of the other stuff I kind of found at that large site I was working at is there's also an interesting correlation with traffic to a URL and how frequently or how quickly Google crawls those URLs again after the fact. It was quite nice to see that the URLs themselves didn't have a ton of traffic prior to this, so it was really easy to take those URLs and see what's going on because there wasn't a ton of noise already there. So that was a pretty interesting find that we came up with.
That's a fascinating one, and you wonder to what extent that's a little bit of a catch-22, right? Like a cause-effect problem. Mm-hmm. And you wonder whether or not the Google team might be using data that comes from either GA or from Chrome itself, right, to sort of decide how frequently to crawl something. There's all sorts of probably conspiracy theories around that as to whether or not that's being done. But what's your opinion on that?
So yeah, I think there's something there. You have all that clickstream data that I guarantee Chrome has. So they have to know what's going on with that. Google Analytics, like you said, exists. Whether they keep it siloed or not, I mean, obviously they keep saying that, but now with all the lawsuits and things that are starting to kind of trickle out now, it's like, well, I think there is something to that. And Google's somehow gleaming that information, even if it's anonymized or they strip it down to a certain degree, I'm sure, but I do think it's there.
The other factor that obviously Google has access to, which there have been conspiracy theories, and perhaps you have your point of view on it, is bounce rate, right? So the extent to which bounce rate can be measured as either via GA, but when Google sees a person respond back to a SERP and a very small amount of time has elapsed and they're back quickly versus maybe 3-5 minutes has happened and then they're going back to the SERP. Now, that's a pretty strong signal, and a lot of folks in the industry think that is influencing the the part of the data that indicates, oh, this might have been a good user experience or a bad user experience. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, heck yeah. You know that that's something that's going to be used. I know years ago there was a term they called pogo sticking, of the user, jumping from result to result to result, and then finally sticking on one. It would make sense even just from a UI perspective, not even a ranking algorithm. You obviously want to have a good product, so you're going to pay attention to any of those signals that you see. So I wouldn't be surprised at all that Google either uses it just for the user experience, but also with the ranking factor.
Right, absolutely. So let's get back to crawlability. Sitemaps, a lot of times within certain CMSs, there's either built into the CMS or some kind of a plugin where you basically publish your sitemaps there, and they're thought of sort of as a set and forget by a lot of folks who are webmasters or SEOs. Do you think that's a mistake, that they sort of think about their sitemaps as you push the button and then you're done?
I think there's a level of diminishing returns. So if you have a really small site, sitemaps probably aren't somewhere where to spend a ton of time and effort and trying to squeeze that juice, right? But on larger sites, so the one I was working at hundreds of millions of URLs, that was a big strategy of trying to figure out how can we get Google to crawl these URLs and even discover them. And so I played around with a lot of different triggers and settings and sitemaps to try to figure out what worked well for Google. For that particular site, and I'll talk about it in my session at Brighton, was having smaller sitemaps. I think the cap is 50,000 URLs or 50 megabytes. That's a lot of data, and it may not seem like a lot of data, but you figure how many websites are out there. That's a ton of information that Google has to pour through just to get some information. And so for that particular site and the strategy, you're reducing it to 10,000 URLs. Worked really, really well for that site. Obviously, that means there's more sitemaps, so then you're kind of like, well, they're doing more crawling, but there's smaller bits of information, and for that site, that reaped really big rewards by continually optimizing that.
Well, certainly for gigantic sites, that could end up being a really important takeaway from this conversation. So great, thanks for sharing that. You're at Last Mile Retail now, which is dealing with sites of all different sizes, particularly in the local and hyperlocal category. And local businesses often have unique challenges in SEO, particularly with newer domains or domains with barely any links, or virgin domains that are just literally launched a few days ago. So what strategies do you recommend for those folks who are sort of stuck with domains that have not been discovered yet, or have very, very lightweight link structures?
I would say Google Business Profiles. It's part of the Google ecosystem. They know it, they crawl it, they see it. I've helped some small local service area businesses, or even brick and mortar businesses, get a ton of visibility in customers just by having that profile created. You link out to that website and kind of work to help get some of those links. So like your chambers of commerce or local businesses or places like that link back to you and do some sort of, I hate saying link exchange, but you're basically saying I'll put a link on my site and vice versa or whatnot. But those types of things help build the signals. But I think it really, having that business profile is probably your best and easy way to really get started.
Yeah, actually, your mention of chambers of commerce reminded me of a tactic which is really useful, which is the co-creation of content with other local businesses that are not competitive from a services or products perspective, but have a similar audience.
Yeah.
And so that can end up being a great content creation strategy. And of course, links just generally end up falling out of that as part of that, as to where that content lives. Does it live on one person's website, at the other business's website? Does it live on the chamber's website? Does it live within the social media profiles of those businesses? There's all sorts of different places this co-created content can live. Another really fun way to do that is to be active in the nonprofit community of your local area, because when you sponsor their gala or you sponsor their volunteerism day, just naturally, as a result of that behavior, that volunteerism behavior, that sponsorship behavior, it tends to generate content and links in a very natural way. So that's a way of, I guess, doing well and doing good at the same time within your community.
That actually is a really good call out. Working with the volunteer organizations and things like that to kind of get your name and brand out there, and then, like you said, getting those links back
Right.
to your profile.
So let's discuss maps, right? Whether you're on a mobile device or whether you're on a desktop device, a lot of times the consumer is interested in trying to figure out, well, which one is the closest as well as which one is the best, right? And maps sort of commingles that data together as to the location, but also the ratings are there. So what are some strategies that can be helpful, layering on top of your Google business profile to improve your maps user experience and visibility?
Oh, great question. So relevance and prominence are two of the three prongs of local strategy and local ranking. And so helping to get a better visibility is get some reviews, get some really good reviews from your customers. One particular client I had they lost their profile. I don't know how. They weren't a techie. They couldn't explain it, but I helped them get it back. And one of the first things I did is like, hey, reach out to some of your customers, get those reviews, because that's going to make a huge difference as far as how much Google will trust your business versus someone else's when they're showing on the maps.
Absolutely. Well, a big buzzword these days in the SEO community and even the nation at large is AI, right? Because between ChatGPT and Bard and a bunch of other tools, Midjourney on the design side, it's a lot of buzz happening. So, does AI fit into SEO and hyperlocal SEO in a way that isn't spammy?
Personally, I try not to get too much into the content creation. Also, that's just not my forte. I don't like writing, so I try to stay out of it as much as possible because I couldn't tell the difference between AI created content versus human created content. But as far as kind of helping supplement your day-to-day work, regex filters or patterns, those to me look like you literally just bang your head on a keyboard and whatever comes out helps filter. Obviously, that's not how it works, but ChatGPT and any of those AI tools out there have drastically made things like that much more efficient. You could use that also to create some sort of formulas or patterns in Excel to maybe help write descriptions. I know I said don't use it for writing, but on your business profile, if you have a lot of listings, you could probably use it to create some descriptions and things that much easier than trying to come up with them on your own. I could definitely see some use cases in that.
Right, right. I guess it's potentially a useful way of identifying things that are popular in certain regions as well. When you're sort of stuck there scratching your head and saying, well, what do I write about now? You could
Oh,
ask
for
for,
sure.
areas, what's popular in Des Moines, Iowa, or whatever, questions like that. You never know what AI is going to float up. Some of them are hallucinations. I've certainly
Yeah,
seen my fair share of AI hallucinations, but still, from a breaking your uh, let's call it not writer's block but content block, because you might be looking for video ideas as well. I guess
absolutely.
AI can be really useful for that.
Oh, for
uh,
sure.
you've probably done more than your fair share of audits, SEO audits, over the years. So what do you see missing or mistakes that are pretty common when you do the SEO audits?
That's another great question. Um, so some of the sites or clients that I've worked with, they don't have a Google Search Console attached,
And that's a big one.
authenticated, and you're kind of like, well, it makes sense. They don't know what they don't know. But when you get in there, it's like, oh gosh, like you're missing out on a ton of data. So definitely those types of things. Sometimes there's a lot of strategies that get implemented and forgotten about, and new SEOs or new leadership come in and they keep pivoting. They don't think about all that old content that still exists out there. Maybe is not very good anymore. So
Hmm.
um, really helping people find those areas to kind of prune, even though Google just came out not too long ago saying, oh, don't worry about pruning content that actually could be bad. Um, I disagree with that statement. I've found instances and I've seen firsthand by removing outdated or content that just isn't good anymore actually helps lift visibility and traffic to a domain.
Yeah, that's a fascinating area that does have some differences of opinion. Obviously, if you're going to go prune, you need to learn your 301s, right? Because that's
Yes.
some people may not realize that no, you don't just delete it because a 404 is not particularly useful. There may be a few links to it. There may be it may still be listed in the SERP, even if you've pruned it. So if you do pruning, so is it purely traffic volume that you use to determine, or is there a subjective analysis as to whether or not the content is sort of still good or expired?
So I take all the data. So I start with the data aspect. backlinks, traffic, all that good stuff. Then kind of create a benchmark that's relative to the site. Then kind of start doing the subjectiveness to it. Is there anything of value here? We just need to freshen it up and say, hey, there's a lot of interest in this. Let's clean it up and refresh this article, or it's outdated, archaic, has zero value. Then 301 that to the relevant directory or other content.
Yeah, actually, you bring up a really interesting point, which I don't see enough people using, is that pruning doesn't necessarily mean pruning, because it may mean replanting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, if you got the
Absolutely.
URL in there and Google already knows about the URL and it's already got some inbound link visibility, maybe it's just out of date, and maybe a rewrite is your better opportunity. As to how much you change your title tag, I'd love to get your thoughts on sort of the replanting and sort of keeping on topic, but so that the inbound links are still appropriate, but what level of refresh, and what would be your thinking around a refresh if you're going to replant instead of prune?
That's a great question again. So one of the last companies I worked at several years ago was an airline, and I came across in this strategy of pruning some piece of the content that seemed like that could be good, just weren't optimized very well. And so I was going through looking at doing all that fun keyword research, and this actually might be a good spot for AI, is clustering keyword topics together. Everyone loves that fun task. AI definitely speeds that up a lot more than history. And so just really understanding kind of where the search trends have changed since that content was originally created. Is it the right title tags and meta descriptions and H1 tags, or has something changed? So in this instance, it was about a page to flights to Hawaii. And the research I found said people wanted cheap flights to Hawaii.
Right.
Not rocket science, but it makes sense. So just adding cheap flights to Hawaii as versus flights to Hawaii made a huge difference, and that page all of a sudden started ranking really well and bringing in a ton of traffic and conversions.
Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of times for these gigantic either franchise organizations or brands with a lot of owned and operated locations, the store locator is super important. And I've seen horrible instances of store locators, either because it's just completely search engine unfriendly with Ajax and JavaScript all over the place, and not even changing the URL when you're showing new locations, to ones that are like, okay, a little bit closer to reality of where they should be, where you have the unique URLs and you have a nice taxonomy so that Google can find all of these store locators. But sometimes you want a little bit more content than just NAP, name, address, and phone on there, right? Maybe they actually always know who the general manager is. Maybe there are opportunities to do fun things if with employee generated content. What are some fun things that have been effective that you've found of ways to sort of flesh out that store locator just a little bit more, so that it's not so dry and so that it has some unique content on it?
Yeah, getting on calls with the people that are involved in the day to day. They're in the stores, that are feet on the street type situation where they're going to know what's up and what's going on, and so picking their brains, they're going to know kind of what people are interested in. One of the ideas that we had at one of the other companies I worked for a few years ago was Google Street View of the actual store. So you could go from outside the store to the inside of the store and kind of walk around. I thought that was kind of a neat idea. Fortunately, didn't get enough traction with the leadership that they thought it was worth the investment, but it was definitely a really cool thing to do. And again, speaking of the flights, the airline that was acquired by the airline I worked for, they did Street View of the airplane. So you could actually go through and see what it would look like sitting in the seat before you picked your seat. And I thought that was a really creative way of really getting people excited about your brand, but also like, do I want row 15 or row 20? And kind of understand where you're going to be sitting at that plane at that time.
Yeah, certainly the virtual tour could be end up being like a really fun and delivers a lot of value to the consumer. Like if you put something through the consumer value filter, I think that's a super good way of prioritizing which things you should do. Which brings to mind another possibility, at the hyperlocal level, which is, testimonials actually end up happening at the local level, right? Because it's not just a testimonial for Domino's. Not saying that many people leave those, but some people love Domino's. And so the idea that those testimonials could end up being deployed at a hyperlocal level on store locator pages would be really interesting, I think, for those people who end up there.
Oh, absolutely. You have schema, which is a nice little bit of code that helps Google better understand the content of a page. You add those testimonials and ratings and reviews to the schema for those individual hyperlocal pages. Now that information shows up in the search results and lets someone know how well you're rated or any of that good stuff. So that's definitely a good application for some of that stuff that you could pull off of Google Business Profiles or wherever else you might have testimonials.
Right, right. Well, one of the things that doesn't often end up on the to-do list for hyperlocal SEO, but maybe should, I'd love to get your perspective on it, is video, and perhaps just beyond testimonial video. But you got to remember, YouTube's the second largest search engine in the world. And so from the perspective of, video content creation and video content syndication, how should either the individual stores or corporate think about video?
Um, oh, absolutely. I think at the store level, showing kind of the insides and outsides of the store, maybe the day-to-day of what's going on, all really good opportunities. If you have any kind of promotions or things like that, create that content. People are going to want to see that and feel part of what's ever going on. And then you have the transcription or the comments underneath is just another opportunity for you to include your name, address, and phone number, because we know how Google loves finding all those citations. So now you're just putting another citation out there for Google to confirm that that's the right way to go. As far as like the corporate level, kind of the same idea, unboxings or again, promotions, giveaways, things like that. Are really good ways to get engagement from customers, especially drawing them to those particular stores where events are taking place.
Great. Well, I'm going to go into perhaps somewhat of a controversial topic relating to the hyperlocal profiles and organizations with a lot of locations. And I've been in some meetings where the debate gets pretty heated on this one, which is, to what extent should a specific location have its own social media footprint? So its own YouTube channel, its own Instagram, its own TikTok, its own LinkedIn profile page, potentially. And you can think of pros and cons that could easily pull this one way or the other, from abandonment, from control and, command and control from a content moderation perspective. So how should an organization think that one through as to whether or not, locations get their own social media footprint?
That is a hot topic. I could think of it from the brand perspective and not having, like you said, the control over what is being done or said or shown. I can only imagine PR would have a nightmare of dealing with that kind of information. But on the flip side, that kind of creativity, because there are some really creative individuals out there that are working in the stores and they have great ideas. And so I would suggest trying to find a way to bridge those two.
Mm-hmm.
Get those individual people in the stores that have some really good ideas, let them voice that to leadership and say, hey, we should be doing these types of things because people love it. They want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
It gets engagement. And then hopefully, the PR team isn't too strict on those types of restrictions and we'll kind of work together on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So do you think that it would be, in some cases, sort of an honor system with editorial guidelines that would be best appropriate, or do you think it should be sort of a moderation style, i.e., like if there's a possibility to do something in sort of a draft mode, that then there's sort of more of a structure to it?
I would say the former, just because it feels more natural and organic. Obviously, when you start to do the moderator part, it becomes less loose and fun and more just structured and
Right.
on brand. But I could appreciate both sides of that coin there, because brands are really, really particular about how that message gets out there, and they obviously don't want someone representing the brand in a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, unfortunately, you kind of stifle creativity when you have that moderation going on.
Yeah, and you may not you may have a personal opinion on this, and you may not, but usually in tandem with that conversation about sort of the hyperlocal social media profiles is this idea that, well, what about employees and their ability to mention their employer right, in their social media posts, which of course probably also could get PR and corporate communications a little bit tied in a knot. But at the same time, to your point about creativity, you think about some of these, multi-location organizations and the passion that some of their employees have for the brand, and how it could potentially go to waste if you prohibit, any mention of your employer in those profiles. Maybe LinkedIn is sort of the one where it'd be most likely to get the thumbs up, right? Because it's sort of a natural relationship between the individual's profile and their corporate employer. But certainly a lot of these folks may end up being significant influencers on YouTube or Insta or TikTok, and sort of to completely waste that opportunity also seems like a miss.
Yeah, it's definitely a fine line. You know, previous companies I worked at, there wasn't as much structure as how employees could engage, and there was some fallout that had to be dealt with, and definitely some tightening of the belt, so to speak, of what content could get out there, and actually having the social media manager go through and say, hey, you're online a lot, so we need to adjust your permissions and who can see your profile and what you post to help prevent accidental exposure that doesn't look good on the company.
Mhm.
But then you get some brands like KFC or Wendy's that tend to have a lot more fun. Maybe not at the individual store location level, but at least from the brand perspective, they have a little bit more fun with how they present the brand and engage with some of the other, competitors out there and kind of throw them under the bus or whatnot. I think those are kind of fun, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the brand. They're always going to win. They want things to be the way they want things to be, and hopefully you can have some constructive dialogues with, like, hey, let's work on this or whatnot. Or I guess you could go rogue and hope like heck that nothing happens to you. But you see too often that a lot of those employees are quickly removed from employment by going rogue. So maybe don't do that.
Right. You do bring up a sort of interesting follow-up question, which is, folks on the employee level, but also at the agency level for a particular brand, understanding that brand's personality, right? Because Burger King is much more irreverent than
Mhm.
McDonald's, right? And so, everybody should sort of understand that brand persona when it guides them in content creation and content promotion. Um, have you seen any good examples of where that sort of brand persona is really articulated in a document, where so that everybody can agree, like, this is the brand persona, and sort of we should be on brand in our content creation and content syndication?
So I would say T-Mobile back when John Ledger was the CEO. They were a small, well, not small, but smaller than the Verizons and AT&Ts and whatnot are out there. And he used kind of that zany approach to gain that notoriety that actually came with T-Mobile. You kind of got looking forward to what's John going to say next, or what is he going to do next? And he created a huge following. At one point, a fan, actually created a John Ledger doll that going forward from that moment on, he required to be part of every one of his videos that he did. Um, and going into the office, they had sayings from him all over of, if you're not listening to your customer, I won't repeat it, but a lot of bad words.
Right.
Because that was just John, that was his personality, and
Yeah.
you could see it with the employees and just how everyone just really thought it was a fun company to be there.
Absolutely. Yeah. The byproduct of that is great morale, right? Which
Mhm.
is, good for everybody. So what has you excited about the next year? It's going to be an interesting year for sure. You know, to the the search engines are, teetering on whether or not, they're going to go full AI or only, give partial replacements of a SERP with AI results. And so that's just the tip of the iceberg. So what has you excited?
Yeah, I think AI is kind of interesting. I don't, talking to, friends and family, it's not something that they care about, know about, or even engage with. I think us in the industry, we're super excited, but also nervous. But I don't know that it's necessarily gotten as mainstream as we may think it has. Um, my kids in college, so there's definitely some AI stuff going on there with helping write papers and whatnot. But I think that's going to be an interesting thing that comes out in the next year. I'm also really curious about the lawsuit. Google, as we know, is being sued, and all this information is kind of getting out there. What does that mean for SEO, for Google, for search, and as a whole, as kind of more and more of Google's recipes or ranking algorithms get kind of out there? We all thought that clicks from the search results were a ranking factor, even though Google denied it. And now all of a sudden, here's this document saying, oh, yeah, we use clicks as a ranking factor. And so it's how much more of that starts to come out. How do SEOs leverage that information as more and more that comes out? Like, oh, okay, how do I get more clicks now that I know it's a ranking factor? Does Google start to dampen that more now because it's out? Like that kind of cat and mouse game that SEOs and Googles have been playing for, ever since Google launched in the early 2000s, right? Or late 90s, whatever it was. We're now kind of getting that recipe. So what does that look like in the future? So those are kind of the things I'm interested and really excited about.
Absolutely. What's fascinating is I do, for those of our clients and prospects, just folks I run into, that they are asking about sort of the future proofing of SEO, that if more and more queries are going to be about, hey, what's the best fried chicken place in in Dallas, Texas, is you may just end up with no SERP. You may have an AI just answer that based on the LLM and what the LLM believes to be the answer. And people have asked me, so like, how do I future proof that? Right. And what's fascinating is that if you sort of think back to Google's original PageRank algorithm, where, links were votes, but not all votes were created equal. If you look at how the LLMs are built, right, they ingest the entire corpus of information across the web and then essentially try to take their best guess hypothesis when a question is asked. So I tell a lot of folks, like, digital PR and syndicating your content out that speaks highly of you as a good fried chicken restaurant is probably going to be future proofing, but it also simultaneously is useful now from a social media context and from an SEO context. And so it's really made syndicated content an increasing part of the sort of overall holistic plans we've been executing for clients. Do you agree that makes sense just from a algorithmic perspective?
It kind of does. I mean, you think about it, the more that the LLM hears that Kevin's Fried Chicken in Dallas, Texas is the best fried chicken in Dallas, Texas, after a while, it's going to start to think, this must be right. So I'm going to regurgitate that information out, and whether it's right or not, but 100%, I could see that definitely playing a big factor.
Well, certainly there'll be some AI targeted SEO spam, the way there's been SEO spam since before Google was even launched. I mean, I was in SEO when it was Lycos, InfoSeek, and AltaVista that had an SEO spam problem.
I could actually see new roles coming out of it as well. People that are experts at training LLMs or creating prompts for GPT or whatever the tool might be. But I could see that being a growing new title that we start to see in job descriptions, that we start to see on LinkedIn in the future, as companies like, hey, we want to leverage this information. How do we get the outputs to be a good output from the inputs that are provided? I don't know what you call that job, LLM inputter, but I could definitely see something there.
Cool. Well, thanks, Shawn, so much for joining me and for brainstorming about the current SEO landscape and the future SEO landscape. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been an awesome time chatting with you, and it's kind of talking shop. Looking forward to seeing you this week over at Brighton.
Absolutely.
Should be a good time.
Great.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.